Thank you. If you're just joining us, former US President Donald Trump has been escorted off the stage at a rally in Pennsylvania after what sounded like gunshots, and they were heard in the crowd. The former president and presumptive Republican nominee raised his fist in the air before being quickly taken off stage. I'm Patricia Karvelas, filling in for David Spears this week. Welcome to Insiders. Donald Trump has been whisked off the stage by Secret Service agents shortly after his rally started in Pennsylvania. Mr. Trump appeared to grab at his ear as he went to ground and was immediately surrounded by his security. Moments later, he rose to his feet and pumped his fist defiantly to the assembled crowd.
Take a look at what happened.
Guys here. Shooters down. Are we good to move? We're clear.
Clear.
I got you, sir.
Let me get my shoes, sir.
Hold that in your head. It's bloody.
So we gotta move to the bus. Let me get my shoes.
Okay, my shoes down.
Watch out.
Mr. Trump's right ear was bleeding as he left the stage. The incident occurred at a rally north of Pittsburgh. Let's go live now to our Washington correspondent, Jade Macmillan. Jade, what do we know?
Well, this is still a rapidly unfolding situation, PK. You could see from that footage there, though, the chaos and the panic that ensued after what sounded like shots were fired at Donald Trump's rally in Pennsylvania. He hadn't been speaking very long. He was getting into one of his stump speeches when you heard those loud noises ring out. The former president appeared to duck behind the lectern that he was speaking from. He was immediately surrounded by what looked like Secret Service officers. People with weapons came onto the stage. You could hear screaming from people in the crowd. He was, it looked like, brought to his feet and taken away into a car that was waiting there. And he has, his campaign has since released a statement saying that he is fine and being checked at a medical facility. A spokesman has thanked law enforcement and first responders for their quick action during what that spokesman said was a heinous act. Now, we had a reporter at that rally in Pennsylvania. She said that there was just utter confusion as this unfolded. She said people were frightened. There were people screaming and crying. Everyone in the crowd, I don't have a head count of how many people were there, but it did look like quite a large crowd at this rally in Pennsylvania were ushered out. They'd been gathered on a showground, and she said that there was anger in the crowd, that people were obviously upset and concerned by what had happened, and that this rally just days before the Republican National Convention, when Donald Trump is going to be officially confirmed as the party's nominee, that it was cut short in such a terribly frightening and dramatic way.
And Jade, they have not yet confirmed what happened here. What do we know? What has the Secret Service said? What, was it a gunshot? Is that confirmed? It sounded like one, but I don't think it's confirmed yet, right?
Look, I haven't seen anything, any kind of official confirmation at this stage as to what happened. That footage appeared to show Donald Trump having blood on his face. But I think at this stage, it's just too early to say definitively what might have happened. We know that President Joe Biden has received an initial briefing on this incident. He is not here in Washington at the moment. He was spending the weekend at his home in Delaware. But in the immediate aftermath of this incident at that rally, I can tell you, we were in this park outside the White House. I was watching this rally on my phone, and the crowd in this park, you can imagine on a Saturday afternoon, it is packed full of tourists. Everyone was ushered out. We saw police at the end of this street, and this crowd of people is still here waiting to see whether or not it will open. So whether that was some kind of protocol that is put in place after this sort of incident, we can't be sure, but President Joe Biden is not here in Washington at this stage, but we know that he is being briefed on what has happened.
And this is now an active crime scene. Of course, the US election has been incredibly divisive and polarising. What's your analysis, Jade, of how this actually frames the coming few weeks and the campaign we're seeing?
Well, this was already an incredibly divisive election at a period in American politics where there is so much division. And of course, this is a country that sadly that has a long and very troubled history when it comes to gun crime. So as I said, we do not have official confirmation yet that that is what has taken place at this rally in Pennsylvania, but you can understand why there would have been so much shock, confusion, panic when these noises rang out, when people saw Donald Trump ducking there on stage and being taken away. We're only 4 months out now from the election, an election that will be, we expect, a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, just days away, as I said, from that Republican National Convention in Wisconsin, when there was going to be so much focus on Donald Trump. There was some expectation today that he might use this rally in Pennsylvania to announce his running mate. That is something that he has been hinting at for months now. So an incredible amount of attention being paid to all of these events. It does sound as though from that statement that Donald Trump says that he is fine, that he's being checked out, but a shocking, frightening and really troubling episode to unfold with all those people in that crowd and at a rally that was being broadcast, at least on some channels, live in full.
And this is quite an escalation in political violence, absolutely, Jade, and thank you. Let's head over now to our panel. And if you're just joining us, this is a developing story. Former President Donald Trump has been escorted from a rally in Pennsylvania after what sounded like gunshots ran out. Returning to our panel, of course, Claire Armstrong, Anthony Galloway, JP Janke. The president went to ground and was quickly protected by Secret Service agents, but blood was seen on his right ear. Claire, this is a really significant escalation in political violence. I mean, the president's campaign, as Jade Macmillan confirmed there, saying that he's okay, but we did see images of him fall to the ground and go to the ground and blood from his ear. This is very significant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Jade sort of said at the end there, that America is no stranger to, what might be gun violence or this kind of incident, but for it to happen in this particular context with a former president, a presidential candidate, it cannot be overstated, the significance of this. And obviously, we still don't know exactly what has occurred here, but it's very notable that Mr. Trump seemed to grab his ear before he went down and then re-emerged with it injured. So regardless of whether there were gunshots, there's obviously been something that's come in his direction that's kind of prompted that reaction. Yeah,
and this is a developing story, so we don't know if there were gunshots yet. Anthony, we know that Trump's campaign is saying he's okay, but this really just shows how escalated the situation is in the US, how divisive and polarised this debate is.
It does, and this is nothing new in American history, relatively recent history. I mean, it's only a little over 4 decades ago that Ronald Reagan was shot in office. Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated as a candidate for president. So this is nothing too new for the US. I think what concerns me is just already going on X, you can already see tweets, viral tweets that are talking about a Democratic supporter, for example, being behind it, and all kinds of disinformation. That really concerns me in terms of what this does for the tenor of the debate in the US.
Yeah, that's a very good point, JP, because right now, the worst thing that could happen is that this escalates the situation further.
Yeah, I think, and we were watching some of the vision before we came on air this morning. We simply don't know the full details, but it hasn't stopped all the rumour and innuendo going around, the blaming of the Biden administration for this, the word Trump surviving an assassination attempt. I mean, all that feeds into this most divisive campaign, which now ramps up. People are starting to tweet that God saved Trump. So it's going to dominate the media for the next week or so, and that photo that we saw of President Trump being escorted off the stage will be one of the most used images over the next couple of weeks.
He never lets a good opportunity go to waste, does he? Like that image, exactly. I mean, this is a guy...
And his fist in the air as he got himself
To
back
have
up.
the fortitude to think to do that to the cameras, I don't know if I thought I'd just been shot at, that I would think there's a moment here for me to...
Yeah, we don't know if he's
rally
been
around.
shot at, but yes.
He obviously thought something had happened to him.
Or to collect your shoes. He was saying, I need to get my shoes before I get off stage. The other alarming thing about that vision was you saw the crowd abusing people. It looked like they were either shouting at the media. So it's being brought into that whole rhetoric now of the media's role in this, and some of the outlets aren't reporting that shots were fired, so they're being accused of a cover-up already. So this
is the guy who's successfully used his own criminal conviction to, roll up his supporters. It hasn't necessarily been a bad thing.
Well,
for
he
him,
galvanised so many donations, didn't he, to his campaign?
Exactly. So if he can do that, he can turn this into...
Now, our intention this morning, I mean, of course, this story is enormous and is breaking while we go live across the country, but was to talk about the pressure on Joe Biden, and that still exists. But how will Australian politicians, and I mean, we are a relatively much more peaceful, thank God, country, and also we don't have this kind of gun violence, but how will our political leaders be looking at this, Claire?
I expect that they'll want to take a very even-handed approach to this, obviously acknowledging the incident, well wishes, obviously it's lucky that Trump is saying that he's okay, and I think that there'll be probably a real reticence to really commentate or get involved, and that would be the case regardless of this incident, just because of how close it is to the election. I think that you would say Australia and many other allies are far more prepared for the potential of a Trump presidency this time around, and that as a country that has so many important things to work through with the US, be it AUKUS, be it other foreign affairs issues, you're not going to want to be seen to overreach or antagonise in either direction, given how close the election is now.
Yeah, that's right. They have been very, very disciplined, and I expect that will continue. Well, time to talk to our guest now. There's been a lot of speculation around what a Trump presidency would mean for Australia. Details of what happened at today's rally are still, of course, coming in. But what we do know is this incident will add a lot more heat to what has already been a very divisive situation in the United States and here in Australia. Tony Burke is the Minister for Industrial Relations and Workplace Relations, and he's our guest this morning. Welcome.
Morning.
Minister, we had intended to start, of course, on your portfolio, but this story out of the United States is incredibly disturbing. The sound of shots fired and a bleeding ear from Donald Trump. His campaign says he's fine. But what are your reflections on what we're seeing unfold in the United States today?
I expect more information will unfold during the course of this program as well, while we get the facts. I'm pleased with the reports that the former President Trump is safe, and I hope everybody involved at the rally is safe there as well. It's a reminder, no matter how the extra information comes through, as to how important it is that violence plays no part in any democracy. And it's a really important reminder in the United States and in all democracies around the world.
And of course, our panel was talking about some of the dis and misinformation about who's responsible. We don't know any of these details yet, but does that concern you? When you talk about the health of democracy, that kind of misinformation and disinformation, of course, has the ability to really incite perhaps more of these kinds of tensions.
Yeah, it's the exact reason why I started by saying more information will come during the course of the program. The The willingness to wait for the facts is something that's often not there, and the misinformation, once it spreads, can be very difficult to undo. Every democracy, the starting point is that we have a shared set of facts, and that's why it's important for me not to speculate in any way. More information will come through, but I guess the two principles for any democracy have to be: you want the shared set of facts, and you want people to be free from violence.
Yeah, absolutely. Does the Australian government think the American democracy is safe? Are you worried about what you're seeing unfold in the United States?
Well, we're worried about the events today in terms of the safety of the people involved. The United States has always been a robust democracy, and our alliance with America has always continued regardless of the different administrations who have been there from time to time. So we don't look to play a role in their elections in any way.
Now, Minister, I was intending to start, and I will go there now, to talk to you about these explosive allegations about some of the underworld infiltration of the CFMEU. The 9 papers have been publishing a series of stories, and I know that you're across them. Have those stories and those revelations shocked you?
The extent of the criminal elements that have been there, I find absolutely abhorrent, And when I drove, we're in Canberra now, when I drove down yesterday afternoon, I went straight to my office in Parliament House and signed a letter to the Secretary of my department asking for advice, as there's more to come from everything that we understand. I want advice on all the powers that I have with respect to what we're seeing out of the construction division of the CFMEU, in particular Victoria, but I don't know whether it's going to broaden with the extra stories. As that advice comes in, I'm effectively going to be looking at 3 things: the advice on the extent of my powers, the allegations as they're revealed, and finally the extent to which the union itself acts immediately and effectively. If they don't, I will.
Well, they haven't yet. And doesn't that concern you? It doesn't look like there's a great appetite for reform in that union.
The fact that John Setka went is a start. It is in no way the end of what needs to be done. The criminal elements, for example, people involved in outlaw motorcycle gangs having the place of delegates on site.
Is that unacceptable?
Completely unacceptable.
And yet they do.
Completely.
And they still do.
Completely unacceptable. That's completely unacceptable. And so, in the advice I've sought from the department, I want to make absolutely clear, everything is on the table.
Like what?
Every
Can you give me some of the
single
options that are potential? One option, of course, Bob Hawke did a very significant thing when he deregistered the former union, the BLF. Are you prepared to deregister the construction division of the CFMEU?
I've sought advice on all my powers, including that one, including appointing administrators to the different branches. I've sought advice on all those powers. I'm not taking anything off the table.
So you are seriously, Minister, considering deregistering the union if that's within your powers?
If it's what needs to be done.
Yeah. What's
and
the
if
threshold?
It's within,
Sorry to interrupt. What's the threshold?
The threshold is what I've asked the department to provide me. So I've asked the department to provide me with the thresholds of the different powers that I have, and for them to be looking, as the evidence emerges, to see what meets those thresholds and what doesn't. But when you look at the role of union delegates, when I think of union delegates, I think of somebody who will serve you on a checkout at Woolies or Coles, who will work as a cleaner in a major centre, who is a highly trained colleague, already an employee, but who's been trained in people's rights and helps their fellow workers. That's what it's about. That's what the union movement uses delegates for. And to see any window where it's being used as a criminal element is completely, not just a problem, completely unacceptable.
On the basis of the allegations alone that have been published, and as you know, defamation laws are pretty serious in our country. Newspapers don't rush to publish unless those allegations are very, very serious. Is the case already made for that union to be deregistered?
Well, there's a question of the legal thresholds, the powers, all of that. There's also the implications as to what that would mean. So, there are some actions where they might sound tough and actually create a worse element because you end up with people with even less regulation around them.
How?
All of
How would that happen?
Well, because registered organisations have, the only reason I can intervene is because we're talking about registered organisations. Some of the powers here as well go directly to the police. There is a task force that operates between the Australian Federal Police and the State Police.
Is there an active investigation to this?
Specifically into outlaw motorcycle gangs. So there will be elements of this that they are dealing with. There are elements of one aspect that was in the papers today where the Fair Work Ombudsman has already been public about an active investigation there. So there are regulators in the police and the Fair Work Ombudsman and the Fair Work Commission. They may take action unilaterally on this. They're all statutory authorities. It's for them to make those decisions. As I see what they do and I see what evidence emerges, I'm making sure the advice to me puts everything on the table with a very clear signal to the union about what's expected. If they don't act, I will.
We've had several royal commissions, Minister, into the construction industry and the union. The Coal Royal Commission, the Hayden Royal Commission. This culture of lawlessness is well known in this union. We know this. These stories have been going for years. If you live in Victoria, this is something you just know if you do business. So given that, why did you abolish the ABCC, which was the body which was meant to be the tough cop on the beat?
Yeah, that's how it was packaged, but that's not what happened. Let's remember the period of the previous government was the period where John Setka's power massively increased. That's what happened while they were in office. If you look at the outcomes of the ABCC and all the allegations that have come out so far, they're all allegations that occurred during the life of the ABCC. It didn't fix any of them.
So did the ABCC fail or didn't have the right powers?
Oh, it completely failed for the simple reason that the whole concept of it was wrong from the beginning, which was about pushing people into their corners. That's what it was about, and that meant you would always, in those situations, empower the most militant players. That's what happens when you push people into their corners. And look at the outcomes. You know, we had the pandemic, so you've got to go before the pandemic to get realistic statistics. Every year of the ABCC, productivity in the construction industry went backwards. You compare the days lost to industrial disputes when the ABCC was in place to what we have now, it has now fallen by 30%. The outcomes for productivity are better now because we abolished the ABCC. What these allegations make clear is there is more to be done, but going back to the old method is clearly not the way to go.
Okay, but isn't it the case that given all of the evidence that you've just supplied, that the ABCC needed tougher powers then if it wasn't able to do what it should have been doing?
It was never able to deal with police matters because police matters have to be dealt with by the police forces. So there are some matters here that properly go to the police. The concept of industrial relations at its best is when you have bargaining working properly and bargaining working in a way that brings parties together. That's what happens in pretty much every other industry. You'll get occasional aberrations, but basically that's how the system works. We have to find a way for that to work in construction too.
Minister, a lot of public money is bankrolling some of this illegal behaviour, including lots of Commonwealth money. Will you halt the money going to these projects if it's been funnelled into, as you say, union delegates who are motorcycle gang members?
Well, I don't think anyone has any interest in halting infrastructure projects.
But isn't it inflating the price of those infrastructure projects?
I don't think anyone has any interest in that. What we want to be able to see, and this is why I've got everything on the table in terms of cleaning this up, what I want to make sure that we're able to deliver is a situation where workers are well paid, where the companies are able to be profitable, where taxpayers are getting value for money, and where the infrastructure we need is being built. And certainly at the moment, and you look at it any time, if they're your four objectives, there is no place for a criminal element in any of it.
So how are you going to clean it up? You say it's up to the union to prove that it can do it. I think a lot of our viewers watching now would think this union is not up to that job.
Oh, and that's why there's no other organisation where I've asked for the exact sort of advice that I've asked for today.
And how quickly will you act?
Afternoon. There are stories that are going to continue to run, I'm told, during the course of the week. I'm certainly not going to end up taking an action where the day later I say, oh, that actually wasn't quite the right one. So during the course of this week, my department and myself will be watching the evidence as it comes out. I've put the union absolutely on notice today in the conversation that we've just had here on air.
There's not just a few bad apples. Do you think this is systemic?
Well, it's certainly not fixed by John Setka leaving. It's certainly not fixed yet. That was the start. But people need to know that the criminal element needs to be gone very quickly, and I am ready to act.
What do you say to people who think that a Labor government isn't capable because of the financial contributions that the CFMEU makes to Labor election campaigns of cleaning up this union?
I couldn't care less about the financial contributions.
Why not stop the donations then?
Because I care about, the donations will be determined by the party office, and you know the separation there. Ministers aren't involved in those decisions, nor do I believe we should be. The thing that I'm making sure of is that I do care about the workforce in construction. I do care about the huge safety risks for workers in construction. I want people to be able to go to work safe in terms of safe workplaces for the work health and safety, but I also want it to be free from bullying. I also want it to be free from thuggery. That's part of workplace safety. And the union at the moment, clearly, at a large number of sites, is not delivering that.
And are you worried that taxpayer money is being wasted by the union through this criminality?
The fact that taxpayer money is involved at some of the sites gives us potentially an extra point of leverage, but I'm not going to punish Australians on their infrastructure. There are other ways that we intend to fix this, and we will.
Okay. Minister, I just want to change the conversation before I say goodbye to you and talk to you about the anti-Semitism envoy and the Islamophobia envoy that will be announced. Why wasn't the Islamophobia envoy announced? My understanding is that you've had trouble hiring for that, and when will it be announced?
You need to make sure that whoever is chosen is the right person to give advice to the government, but also has the broad support of the community that is subject to that sort of bigotry. Now, to make sure that we've got the right person, we would have liked to have made the announcements together. We had a situation where on the anti-Semitism envoy, international conference, there are already 35 countries with this position around the world, and we wanted to make sure we were represented there. There was no point rushing the second appointment to make sure you could announce them together, even though we would have liked to have been able to.
Okay, and timing of the Islamophobia, is that this week? That's what I've been told. Is that likely to happen? And do you know who it is?
It'll happen when it's ready. It'll happen when it's ready.
Do you know who it is?
It'll happen when it's ready.
Has someone said yes?
It'll happen when it's ready.
Okay. You are in a seat being targeted by the Muslim Votes loose group. We're not kind of sure of exactly how they'll operate. Are you in real trouble in your seat?
I've always viewed my seat as a marginal. I never take it for granted. Regardless of who runs, what needs to be known is there is a genuine sentiment in the community of deep frustration that they want our position with respect to Gaza to be stronger. That is a real sentiment that is there in the community. That's why some of the things that we've done, people have been very happy about in terms of getting aid to the region from 10 million up to beyond 70 million, moving the embassy from Jerusalem back to Tel Aviv as the government policy, calling out the illegal status of the settlements, referring again to the Palestinian occupied territories. There's a lot that people have been happy with. People were glad that when we voted for ceasefire, glad when we voted for improved Palestinian recognition. Do they want more? Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Minister, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Minister Tony Burke there. Now, very shortly, we'll be joined by the panel to talk about, those envoys, but also this developing story that we're seeing come out of the United States. Of course, Donald Trump was at a rally this night, but morning our time, where shots were fired. Let's return to our panel. Claire Armstrong, Anthony Galloway, JP Janke, although we don't know if they're gunshots, which we were discussing.
Take a look what happened.
We've got some pictures on the screen. Just to recap what's happened in the United States, there was a Donald Trump rally. There are his supporters there, of course, and that possible shooting, and I say possible because this is still emerging, happened in Pennsylvania. That's a feed from what happened. Now, we're out of that now. I understand that Donald Trump says he's okay, but we heard there, the first words I think we would have probably heard this morning from a government minister talking, of course, about the importance of the alliance and warning about political violence escalating.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister has also just put out a very short statement saying the incident at the rally or the campaign event is very concerning and confronting. There's no place for violence in the democratic process. And, quote, I am relieved to hear reports that former President Trump is now safe. So that's obviously just a very initial reaction from the Prime Minister as well in a statement.
And we can share some breaking news that there are 2 people now confirmed dead. One is also the alleged shooter, although, as we say, we still don't know what weapon was used. There are so many details yet to, but 2 people dead out of that Trump rally in Pennsylvania. The most dramatic escalation I think we've seen in political violence in contemporary times in the United States in this matchup, which is proving to be incredibly divisive. Yes, Tony Burke in that interview, very careful as you'd expect him to be, but I think the message that he sent, though, Anthony, was pretty significant on the fear about what happens when political violence escalates. Absolutely, and this will only heighten concern within the Australian government about the presidential contest in the US. I mean, they won't say this publicly, but Australian government officials and Labor MPs I'm speaking to just think it's such an indictment on the Democratic Party that they don't have an alternative to Joe Biden, and that all signs point towards him losing that contest against Trump. This will only heighten that concern. Yeah, what do you think, JP? Well, we were talking about it before. I think, you know, this Trump, if it's an assassination attempt, will just dominate the media up until the actual election. So it cuts Biden out of it. And I think Biden's age was sort of cutting Biden out of it. His messages on his policies weren't getting through to the voters. You know, here in Australia, we heard nothing about his policies. It was all about his age and his mental capacity. Now, this is going to dominate world media. Biden's ability to get the message across to voters, I think, is gone. And Claire, the other part of this is, of course, in the United States, there is a culture of these big political rallies in the lead up to elections. You would think that an incident like this really changes a lot of the optics around this. Well, to an extent, the footage that obviously we're just watching come through live before the show of people at that rally, very defiant, very angry. I mean, obviously there would have been a lot of confusion, but it didn't feel as though, I mean, if that had happened in Australia, I think the reaction might be quite different because it would be such an unusual occurrence. So it changes the optics, but, you know, I wouldn't put it past Mr. Trump to reappear quite quickly at another event, you know, even perhaps in spite of advice, to show that he won't be cowed by this incident, and it could actually kind of heighten that type of event and the optics around it, rather than it be a pivot away to being more subdued. Everyone who goes to these rallies in the USA, like, everything's scanned. You are checked quite extensively as you walk in. So it's yeah, I mean, the investigation will just be how did this happen? Absolutely. How did it happen? And that, you know, that's just in its infancy. It's just starting, right? But I think those images of Donald Trump's ear bleeding will be used in the campaign. Tony Burke also referred, the minister we interviewed, to misinformation and disinformation that will... And what he referred to, JP, which I thought was an interesting, like an important use of agreed set of facts, which I feel we are getting far away from, particularly in the United States, but even here it's been a bit of an issue. Yeah. How important will that be? Well, we're just ensuring that we're talking about things accurately here. We're in the world of social media. So social media will blur the facts and the investigation as it goes forward. You know, already on your social media, you'll see allegations of who's involved, who should blame, who we're going, you know, what we're going to do. So I think facts are great, but in the world of social media, facts go out the window. Let's hear from some Americans who are outside the RNC convention in the United States, reacting to this incident at this rally, the Donald Trump rally. Here we are.
My heart dropped. This is going to be an exciting week. We have so much going in the right direction for our country. This is not something that this country needs. So immediately I just prayed for President Trump, and I'm praying for everybody at this convention as well as at the rally that's happening, because it's just scary times, and I know emotions are high, and I know that this country is really struggling to find its place, but it's not how we find it.
Actually very scary. I mean, what's going on in America right now is actually very sad. Obviously, they're trying to do something to take Donald Trump down, but the people will prevail. Justice will be served, and Trump will be back in 2024.
I mean, it makes you sick, really. It gives you the political discourse, and it's always been bad. But for that, and I think so much of it is just hype that, that gets people riled up to a point where that would happen. Or that opposing political views are so contentious that people can't stand the thought of someone else's political views to the point where they would take action to make an attempt at a candidate's life.
Americans speaking outside the RNC convention about the shots fired at the Trump rally. Trump campaign says that Donald Trump is okay, but he was seen with his ear bleeding, and this is obviously an escalation. 2 people we understand are dead, one of them being the person who was the alleged attacker. Well, we don't know exactly what the weapon was.
And I think those comments are probably on point, that when you build up an audience and hype them up to political discourse, something like that can happen.
Now, of course, this week has very much been about Joe Biden's political future, which we've touched on. And there was a defiant press conference from Joe Biden, one of the longest press conferences we've seen, where he took questions from reporters, not something he does commonly. And he was asked specifically about generational change, which is, of course, the big question around his ageing and his ability to run a campaign and even be president. Here was his response.
We've never been here before. And that's the other reason why you say, hand off to another generation. I've got to finish this job. I've got to finish this job because there's so much at stake.
JP, does that argument that he's got to finish the job and it's too serious, Trump's up against them, only he can beat him?
No, we were having a yarn before. They're saying that there's not enough time to replace Joe Biden, even though the election's months away. I think, you're looking at the polls in the swing states, they're against Biden. It was time for generational change before they made him the nominee.
But he's certainly digging in. We're joined now by Michael Rowland and Jade Macmillan, who are in Washington, D.C., of course, covering what is an incredibly disturbing story emerging out of the United States. I'm going to start with you, Michael. This is really disturbing. We've seen the pictures of Donald Trump on stage. What can you tell us?
ABC News has confirmed there are 2 people dead. One, assumedly what police authorities are describing as the shooter. One, sadly, possibly a member of the audience. The other important thing is that Donald Trump is alive and well. He is safe. Secret Service agents, as we've all now seen from the images, jumped onto the stage quite quickly. They are well trained for these circumstances. They formed a human shield around the former president. Hustled him off stage. It appeared the former president didn't want to go initially. He was well enough to get up. We all saw the blood, though, trickling from his ear. Fist pumped a couple of times to show to his audience and to America more generally that he was okay. Walked down the stage, hustled into his armoured limo. Again, another fist pump. So we know that Donald Trump is okay. His campaign has told us that he's okay. I've seen images from ABC news outlets here in America of his motorcade speeding away from the rally scene. So that's what we know at the moment, and we can call it Donald Trump surviving what was clearly an assassination attempt, which is an absolutely horrible turn of events in what has already been such a volatile election campaign.
And Jade, this is the sort of worst thing that could happen, this escalation in violence in a very febrile and polarised environment. How does this change what has already been a divisive election campaign?
Yeah, well, this is just such an extraordinary, shocking moment, terrifying for the people in that crowd, including one of our own team members, PK, who was at that rally. She said that when these shots rang out, people immediately dropped to the ground. People were crying, people were screaming. She, thankfully, is okay. The people that she was with are okay. But she said there was a lot of anger in that crowd, as you might expect, afterwards. Donald Trump hadn't been on stage for long. This was a highly anticipated rally. We are only days away now from the Republican National Convention in Wisconsin, where he is supposed to be officially confirmed as the party's nominee. By her count, it was about roughly 12 minutes into this speech when this terrifying incident occurred. So I think we expect to hear more from President Joe Biden. He is not in Washington at the moment. He's been spending the weekend in Delaware, but we know that he is being briefed at the moment, including by members of his national security team. We don't have any more information on his movements, but you would imagine, Michael and PK, that he would be returning to the White House at this incredibly troubling time in US politics. So close, only 4 months out now from the US election.
And Michael, of course, you're in the US because there's been so much pressure on Joe Biden as president to potentially step aside, but this really puts the focus back on the Republicans and on Donald Trump. As Jay just mentioned, we've got this Republican convention this week. That was where the focus was going to already turn. That will be really it was already a key event. We understand Donald Trump to announce his vice president nominee, but now, of course, overshadowed or perhaps adding to the optics of that convention, what is the survival of an attempted assassination attempt? It's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And listen, I'd be surprised if there wasn't some change to the convention, possibly a delayed start, an absolutely horrible thing to happen to the former president, who was set to be crowned at the end of this coming week as the Republican Party's putative nominee. So yes, the focus is on the Republicans that way, who are as shocked as everybody else is. You mentioned Joe Biden, though. Yeah, there's been a lot of pressure on Joe Biden, but these are moments where presidents rise to the occasion. As Jade said, he is in his home in Delaware. Moments of national crisis, which this is. We expect to see President step up, whether he flies back here to give an address to the nation. So the focus will be on Joe Biden in his response as the Commander-in-Chief, as America's political leader, to offer some soothing words and in the inevitable on-camera remarks he makes, to try to soothe down these enormous tensions in this country, which we saw play out in the worst possible way in Pennsylvania just a couple of hours ago.
Jade, that's actually quite key right now, isn't it? The worst thing that could happen next is a further escalation of violence. How key then is President Joe Biden's words in that context of trying to de-escalate what is a very, very intense and polarised situation?
Yeah, and look, you'd have to imagine that all of this political pressure that Joe Biden has been facing in this past fortnight since that debate performance has to be put aside now. Those people within his party who have been questioning his candidacy, this is a moment now where I think Americans would expect the president to step forward, to try to do what he can to, if not ease, at least not further inflame tensions. This was already a moment in time in US history when politics is so polarised, when Americans are so divided. I think you will expect the president to really need to meet this moment, and how he does that and when he does that, we wait and see. But certainly Joe Biden being briefed by his team as we speak.
Now, the Prime Minister has issued a statement. I just want to share that with our viewers. And the Prime Minister says in this statement, the incident at former President Trump's campaign event in Pennsylvania today is concerning and confronting. There is no place for violence in democratic process. I'm relieved to hear reports that former President Trump is now safe. And we know that, of course, that all leaders will be saying similar things, I imagine, around the world. I cannot imagine a political leader not saying something similar. This is not what you need or want in a democracy. But Claire, I want to bring you back in if I can, because we are seeing here, obviously, these words from world leaders like Anthony Albanese trying to de-escalate the situation and talk about, you know, wanting Donald Trump to be safe. Our government has also been trying to build relationships with the Trump potential administration. We are in a very tricky time with this election in November, where, you know, relationships with an alliance as important as this have to be built across the political divide.
Yeah, and I think what will be maybe obviously a secondary concern for Americans, but much more of a concern for us and other allies, is that an event like this will really push the US administration to be very inwardly focused and looking in on itself, dealing with, as has sort of been well canvassed this morning, quite a divisive public opinion across the political divide. And that then makes it very difficult to have any kind of political capital to do the sorts of things that we as Australia might be expecting or hoping to work with the US on, be it matters of national security, trade, other issues. If you've got a situation where this country is in crisis internally, even if there's goodwill and intent, there's just not going to be the bandwidth to engage, and that's going to be a big challenge for the Australian government. How do we, continue to pursue AUKUS, continue to pursue all of these other issues that we work with America on, while, for all intents and purposes, the rest of the year for that country now is basically going to be focused around this issue.
Now, certainly right now, this is a breaking news story, lots of details still emerging, but what we know is that when an event as serious as this, and sure, he says he's okay, his campaign says he's okay, that Donald Trump has survived this, but this is a pretty serious attempt at someone's life, someone running for president, but all lives, of course, are equal. This is 2 people dead, one being the potential gunman. But if we can, this is a political show, just Joe Biden, does this take the pressure off Joe Biden? I mean, this is really interesting how this will affect the Democrats. They can't be seen, can't they, Anthony, to be talking about themselves now?
No, so potentially it potentially helps him for a few weeks, because he is the sitting president. He has a role, as Michael was saying, in calming down the nation after this attack. But yeah, I mean, just to go back to Claire's point, you had European officials and foreign ministers meeting key aides of Trump, meeting close allies of Trump in DC this week. So. Kind of the Europeans and much of the US alliance system is already kind of moving to expecting a second Trump presidency, and in many ways they're Trump-proofing NATO with more support for Ukraine, with moving Ukraine to being an eventual member of NATO. So I just wonder, with all of that, was it a missed opportunity for the Prime Minister not to go to Washington this week and engage with Trump world?
Interesting you say that. The Prime Minister was actually in seats like Peter Dutton's seat of Dixon, announcing his candidate this week. He has also been described as Airbus elbow from the opposition, so you can understand why at a time of a cost of living pressure the Prime Minister sent the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, given we know what would have been said if the alternative happened. But that's politics.
Well, it's the ultimate case of gaslighting from the opposition leader, isn't it?
Right.
It's been Airbus elbow up until now, and then he goes to NATO. Oh, well, he goes to DC in the wake of NATO while the Prime Minister...
But was the Prime Minister messing with Peter Dutton's head when he arrived in Dixon, right?
Yeah.
That's Peter Dutton's electorate, while Peter Dutton was in the United States.
Yeah, it's a bit of a coincidence. I think the old Deirdre Chambers, coincidence. But,
Yes.
It's politics. It's politics.
Talking to Labor people, they don't seriously expect that Dixon isn't really on their kind of
Well, it's a
radar.
margin. It is a marginal
close.
seat, though.
They talk about it every election, but
they do. And
Ryan and Dixon were the 2 seats he went to that they don't really...
It's difficult, but it is still marginal.
Yeah.
Look, Richard Marles, of course, is the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister. He was sent to NATO as Australia's representative. Of course, this was all happening while huge speculation around Joe Biden's future, and of course, as you say, the preparation for a potential Trump presidency. Here he is answering questions around that.
We are confident that whatever happens in November in America, we will continue to have a strong alliance with the United States, and the key equities that we have in that alliance will be able to be maintained.
So that's Richard Marles addressing that issue, and they've been very disciplined, I think, the government. Look, we're going to go to some live pictures now of the active crime scene, which is what it is now being officially declared as in Pennsylvania. This is, of course, where the possible shooting of Donald Trump at this rally in Pennsylvania happened earlier our time this morning. Donald Trump is safe, but he was seen clutching his right ear as popping sounds were heard. The ABC has confirmed that 2 people have died as a result of this incident. These are investigators at the scene in Pennsylvania. You can see them walking around and talking and doing the work that you'd expect them to do right after an incident like this, with 2 people dead, but not the former president. He has survived what looks like an assassination attempt, and we still are yet to know exactly what that was. Kevin Rudd, who of course is our former Prime Minister but ambassador representing Australia to Washington DC, has also released a statement this morning, and we'll bring it to you now. He says all Australians are shocked by the attack on former President Trump at his campaign rally this evening. Violence has no place in our democracies. It is a relief to see that President Trump is safe. Our thoughts are with him and his family. Of course, all of these statements in the same spirit, which is wishing Trump well for his health, but also, you know, trying to bring down the temperature of what is a really dangerous situation of people very, very, well, scared for their lives. I mean, people in that rally, let's just talk about that for a minute. These people, yep, they've turned up to support Donald Trump. That's a terrifying situation to be in, JP. I mean, unimaginable for an Australian.
Absolutely. Very unimaginable for us Aussies, but in America, such a heightened situation, I think, politically, and those environments can play out now.
Now, it was very hard for if we could just turn just to some domestic issues, which I think are important still, of course. The CFMEU stories are rolling out. 60 Minutes will have more. You know, every day we're seeing different allegations. What did you make of the way Tony Burke handled those questions? Really a tough line from him about using all the powers in his power to try and deal with this union.
Quite significant to be talking about deregistering the construction union for the first time since Bob Hawke did it. But let's not forget, under Anthony Albanese's leadership, they have been much more stronger and principled on, especially the Victorian division of the CFMEU. Within days of taking over the leadership, Albanese moved to expel Setka. Now, some of that was convenient because Albanese's close allies in Victoria are the socialist left of Labor, and John Setka was the industrial left of Labor. So it kind of worked for Albanese's close allies, but nonetheless, he set the tone early on the CFMEU in Victoria, which I think has put them in good stead to now be talking about this stuff now. Having said that, I mean, the coalition is going to really hammer them over the abolishment of the ABCC.
Yeah, what did you make of his answer on that? He basically said this flourished while the ABCC was there.
He's got some good points, but I mean, according to Nick Mackenzie's reporting, corruption and criminality has kind of skyrocketed in very recent times. So, I mean, I think there's more to play out, but I think definitely the coalition's going to hammer that point of, well, they have always argued that you need a dedicated body to deal with the particular elements of criminality and kind of flagrant abuse of civil laws with something like the ABCC. So Labor's going to have to continue to answer that question, I think.
The other big thing this week in our domestic politics is the ongoing social cohesion conversation and the fallout from the Gaza war. We had the announcement of an anti-Semitism envoy, Gillian Siegel, that was announced. And this week, I understand, I've been told the announcement of the Islamophobia envoy will happen. Now, of course, a lot of questions around all of that. Here is the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, explaining why he's done it.
I have spoken with members of the Jewish community here in Melbourne, right around Australia, who have not felt safe. Members of the Jewish community whose children are worried about wearing their school uniform in our capital cities.
That's the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, explaining. Now, this is very real for the Jewish community. Also, we've heard incidents of rising Islamophobia too, but there has been some criticism at this idea of a hierarchy. Why these 2 roles? Why not beef up the Race Discrimination Commissioner, for instance? JP, you're an Indigenous Australian. You know quite a bit about the way prejudice works in this country. What did you make of this?
Yeah, for a lot of First Nations people, I think it was quite puzzling, given the the huge increase in online racism towards First Nations people following the referendum. We call it the child of the referendum, is the increase in racism directed at First Nations people. So, you know, a lot of people experience that racism that other sectors are experiencing every day.
So what's it about then?
I think in the context of this heightened awareness around social cohesion, the envoys across governments have come and gone, some more misguided than others. We've had envoys to Indigenous Australians. The former Prime Minister Tony Abbott was one.
He was an envoy for that. Yeah.
Yes, and I think what the government is trying to do in this instance, and as they have in previous, is to put a particular issue on the agenda and make it stand out as a focus. Obviously, longer term, you would hope that that is backed in with something that is far more broad-based and actually goes down to a first principles level of what is, you know, the rights of any Australian walking around today. How should they be able to go about their day being respected and treated fairly?
Just on the Islamophobia envoy, no doubt they've had trouble finding one because of the fallout of Fatima Payman. I understand someone was just about lined up and pulled out around the time of Payman's defection, but people in the government also tell me it's been really hard to, and I don't want to speak for Muslim Australians, but this is what people in the government tell me, that it's really hard to find someone in the Muslim community that can speak for the whole community. It's more difficult. They don't have a body like the Executive Council for Jewry, for example, where you can't necessarily go to the National Imams Council and assume they speak for the whole community. So that's been part of the difficulty in identifying one. But as you say, I understand that, and they've identified someone now, and announcement's imminent.
Yeah, and of course, this is going to be an ongoing issue for them. We saw, you know, a demonstration in Queensland by, again, activists as the Prime Minister spoke. So this, and of course, people are right to protest, but this war has really activated a lot of people, and some of the rhetoric, and I think it's at the fringes, but it's some of the rhetoric that people have been using has been clearly inflammatory. Look, before we end the show, I just want to return to our top story that we've been covering, of course, all morning and will continue to across ABC News throughout the day, and that's former President Donald Trump being escorted from a rally in Pennsylvania after what sounded like gunshots ringing out. Now, he says, and his campaign says, there are the images of that happening this morning. If you're just tuning in, Donald Trump fell to the ground. He was then lifted up and there was a fist pump, but there was blood coming from his ear. So there is now an active crime investigation of that area in Pennsylvania after this incident. We want to just bring you the latest on that. 2 people have died, one of them the alleged gunman, or person rather, and yet we'll have more details on that. But look, Claire, this will frame the Australian political week too, won't it? I mean, you know, we can talk about CFMU and other issues, but ultimately this is going to be the story.
Yeah, Australia is very closely connected to America culturally, politically. There's lots of similarities and parallels between the two countries. We're very dependent on them in a lot of arenas, and how this plays out in the States will directly impact Australia, and obviously that's going to be of primary concern for the political scene here.
And JP, that's what happens when these big, I mean, this is our biggest ally, the biggest superpower in the world. It sort of frames everything in terms of our own discourse.
Yeah, we'll dominate world media for the next week or so, and you know, we're 4 months away from the election, so it's going to be one of the driving forces behind that election.
It certainly is. Okay, and thanks to my panel, Anthony Galloway, JP Janke and Claire Armstrong, and a very different insiders than what we had planned. But thank you for really being able to bring our audience what is a very significant story unfolding this morning.